When I was 24, I bought an investment property on the Central Coast for $235K back in the good old days. Now, there was a heap of stuff wrong with it when I looked at the building and pest. So I wrote my solicitor an email trying to get a whole bunch of stuff fixed. But instead of fixing it, the other side actually gave me a huge price reduction and I got it down from 235 to 213K. Now, obviously, I learned that that is a thing that we might be able to do. In this video, we're gonna show you how to use the building and pest report to negotiate a better price point on settlement of your property.
Wait. So you're telling me you bought a property in the Central Coast of New South Wales for $235,000?
213K actually. So after the building and pest reduction, it was insane, man. I remember buying the Residex report, which was the report with like the hottest suburbs in New South Wales. This was back in 2011 at the end of the GFC, and places were still selling up there for under 300K.
Man, that is such a great experience, hey. I remember that property. I can't remember what you bought it for. That's like a good little refresher there. But man, that must have felt really good. 24 years of age to be able to get yourself back over $10,000 in the purchase price for a property, you know, all the way back then, which probably felt like a really expensive property back in those days anyway as well, right?
Man, I actually, like, it was fucking cheap even back then.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I was driving around Wollongong, Central Coast, all of Sydney every weekend with my mate, and we found this suburb and we're like, what's wrong with it? And then when I looked at the suburb, at that time there was 70% renters and the average household income was just $400 a week. So there were many issues with the suburb, but this report said that that suburb should grow by 9% per year for the following 5 years. And it did more than that. It actually doubled in the next 5 years.
Yeah, nice. That's crazy. And it's such a nice little strategy that you can use. And I think just big disclaimer with this video is you can never guarantee that you're going to get any money back from a building and pest report. It's always going to depend on the property that you buy, the way that it's been maintained. But I know with that particular property, it was a really rundown, dilapidated, older home. And that was the intention because you partnered up with one of your mates who was a chippy, right?
Yeah.
And so you wanted something that you can renovate. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about how that process unfolded for people that could maybe use this to their advantage?
You know, so I was more than happy to pay $235. Like, that's the first thing I want people to recognize. We always negotiate the price point that we're happy to pay, and this is just a nice to have that works 50% of the time. But what I did is I looked through the 90-page building and pest report, realized that 70 pages were liability for that builder, and then I just wrote a huge email to my solicitor saying, look, there's an issue with the kitchen, there's an issue with the bathroom, some of the piering under the house is a bit shot, there's some termite damage, the granny flat that was in the backyard was a bit busted up too. Can you please ask them to like paint this, replace that carpet?
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm like, you know, I really got scared by the report and I just sort of asked for everything to be done. And then they've come back to me like a week later and said, we don't want to fix anything, but would you be okay with, I think it ended up being a $22,000 reduction. It was huge.
Yeah, that's massive. That's probably a record as well.
Yeah, I haven't ever negotiated better than that again for myself or for one of the 800 properties we bought for clients.
And we went and saw Phil Anderson the other day and there was some really good insights there. But basically what he said, during the declining phase of a real estate cycle, which the last one was sort of from 2008 to 2012, it's a completely different market back then. And only during those phases of a real estate cycle can you really negotiate that hard. But still, you know, I've seen some positive results over the last few years during a hotter market as well. So it can be done. It's kind of that situation. It's like if you don't ask, you're never going to receive it. But if the property warrants it, if the building and pest report and if the building and pest inspector warrants that type of negotiation strategy, you can definitely use it.
100%, bro. So the strategy is quite simple. Like, you know, pay market value or whatever you can for the home that you feel comfortable with. Get your building and report completed. Call the building and pest inspector as always and figure out what's really wrong with the property. Review their report with a fine-tooth comb and get your solicitor to do the same. Draft an email with your solicitor that's sent to the other side, asking them to fix the items. If they don't fix them, maybe you can work on a small price reduction. What I will say though is I've seen it happen before for myself and other clients. Sometimes if the reduction's significant, the bank can have an issue with settling on the property because they've got to revalue, and that can throw a lot of spanners in the works. It can be very risky too. So absolutely work super closely with your solicitor, and regardless of where in Australia or the world you're doing it, make sure the solicitor is talking to the banks early, and if a revaluation needs to be issued or an adjustment to a contract, get the solicitor to do that stuff to safely protect yourself.
Yeah, there's always, things that make it a little bit more challenging, but, if you can get, even just $1,000 back, it warrants that time to go back and forth with everybody there, which is great. And, I personally used this on my first property as well, based off your advice as well, which was great. And it really helped with that particular property, because similar sort of strategy with your one on the Central Coast, in the sense that it was like, a really, really rundown house on a good piece of land in a decent location. And then, getting that building and pest report was like the most scared I've ever been in my life. I'm like, what do you mean I'm buying a property that's falling over? Like it was that bad. I think it had like 200 and something pages. I remember going through it with you on like Boxing Day or something when we got it.
And you knew you were going to knock it down too, so it really didn't matter, but it still freaks you out, right?
Oh man, it still freaked me out at the time, but then we're just like, no, let's process it, give the building and pest inspector a call, have a bit of a chat with him about those issues that came up, and then we're like, okay, cool, well, let's see if they'll do a lot of this work. And then I emailed the solicitors saying, hey, can we please replace the gutters? Can we please do X, Y, Z items? Quite a substantial amount of work. And then once that got presented to the seller's solicitors, they sort of came back and were like, wait, what's going on? Like, we can't do all of that work for you. Do you still want the property? And they were kind of a little bit fearful that I was about to walk away from the opportunity. And what that gave me was a lot more control in that situation as well. And then I ended up being able to negotiate about $7,500 back, which when I was 25, that's a lot of money. Like that was a lot of money to me. And I used those funds to actually get the property up to scratch. So I actually spent the money on the property to get it up to scratch, because the work needed to be done. Similar to San Remo, right? It needed to be done regardless. It's just makes it a little bit easier to justify that process. And then if that work needs to be done, it's like, cool, gives you a little bit of money in the back pocket to pay for those jobs.
100%. So from my experience as a buyer's agent, that I think we've bought $250, almost $300 million worth of property now. This works about 50% of the time. I tried it on a property I bought about 3-4 weeks ago and got a big fat zero. I think they actually gave me $500 off or something like that.
Case of BNP report.
For the 5 minutes it took me to go through the email and produce it, it was a pretty good return on time, but it doesn't always work out. So don't get the shits with it. I remember a client recently, absolute legend, living in Melbourne. We bought them a property for 50 grand below market value, a knockdown property. They tried to do this and then got the shits when the other side said no. And I'm like, the property's 50 grand below market value, and you're knocking it down immediately after you buy it. This list was just written to get a reduction. It doesn't mean it was the wrong property. And they got the logic around that, and then they proceeded with the property. But that's the reality is you're buying the property. This is just a tool to get a little reduction at the end of it.
100%. And in a hot market, it can be extremely challenging. And more often than not, they've got multiple offers, and they've just chosen the offer with, the best balance between price and terms. Now, they could have a backup there that they could be highly motivated to buy that property. It's like, if you go to them and you're asking for thousands of dollars back, or for them to do a lot of work on the property that they don't want to do, because if they wanted to do it, they would have done it before selling. And, they'll just tell you to basically stuff off, and I'm going to go take this other offer. So it really depends on the market conditions. It definitely depends on the property and what issues actually need to be taken care of. But always, as investors, we're trying to get the best return on our investment, and you've got to use these unique opportunities to try and make that deal that little bit sweeter.
The last thing I'd add to this is, while I got a $22,000 reduction on my San Remo property
in 2011,
it needed $100,000 worth of renovation before I sold it. So just remember that if your strategy like mine when I was getting started was to buy, the worst property on a better street in a good suburb, then, often these reductions that you get won't actually cover the full works. And it's important to remember that as well. If you're working with someone like us, it's nice to get 5K off, but if there's 60 grand worth of work, it's still 60 grand in the future you've got to do.
100%. So it's always best to talk with your solicitor once you've got a property under contract. Talk with your building and pest inspector as well. And then if you get any reduction, making sure that your mortgage broker or bank manager and the solicitor are working together, because there's obviously a lot of moving parts at that point in time. You really need to lean on your advisors to make sure you're doing it the right way and to make sure that you're not going to get burnt or miss one of the terms within the contract as well.
Woo! That's a wrap. That's a wrap.
Have a
cool,
spin.
bro. Yeah. Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. That's so nice, eh? Oh.